my God! I can't believe this! Yo, I can't believe this! Yo, I cannot believe this! It's just, oh my...
It's got a cute name, isn't it? Is it a cute one? Bulbasaur.
Yeah, there you go.
Bulbasaur. Oh my God.
That's it.
Wigglypuff.
The first Pokemon game came out when I was about 2 years old, and it's been ruining my life ever since.
I think it's bullshit, the fact that they keep having like different versions of the same game with like minute differences. It really doesn't need to be a thing ever since they had like Wi-Fi global trading. I hate the fact that they'll introduce really cool concepts, like in X and Y they introduce customizing your trainer, and then in the next game they just get rid of it. For what reason? I don't know. They literally had the code there. It's the same engine. Why does it have frame rate issues like this? Why does it look like an N64 game?
People have been frustrated with Nintendo for a while now. I think among the like hardcore fans, it would be a combination of, you know, not liking their general corporate practices, the fact that they're very litigious, the fact that they're very hard on copyright-based issues. Especially if you're in the emulation community, I can understand you feeling quite alienated from Nintendo over the last few years. Or if you're just someone who was a fan of franchises like Pokemon, you might just feel a little bit burnt out on them releasing very similar games, often with very similar issues, taking a long time to implement changes that people have been asking for quite a while. In some ways, it's a natural consequence of the fact that they've clearly been fairly committed to maintaining the demographic that they always had, making games for kids that are like 6, 7, 8 years old maybe. Where other franchises have kind of grown with their audience, Pokemon has been fairly stagnant in a lot of ways. Like I say, I was a little kid when I first started playing these games, and I kind of gave up when I was around, I don't know, 15 or 16 for the most part. The last Pokemon game I really got into was, I think, Black and White, because I just felt like at a certain point these games were no longer being created for an audience that included me. There's also, on a broader level, maybe a little bit of an animosity towards big corporations, especially in the game industry recently, for many reasons, some of which have been discussed previously on this channel. With all this said and done, I think it's time for us to rant in the woods today about Palworld. So the game that some have referred to as Pokemon with guns has been a frankly absurd success. And with that has come a lot of responses, and to be honest, I've been a little bit frustrated with all of them. For some, this has been kind of a hit against the corporate entities that be, a strike against the big guys in the name of these smaller independent developers that are more interested in giving players the things that they have been wanting for quite a while. And for some responses saying that Palworld, while being some kind of hit against Nintendo, is also in some ways a bit of a trashy rip-off, not just of Pokemon, but of other popular game franchises of the present day. But in the case of Pokemon specifically, potentially just taking direct models and then tracing over them for their own art in the game, which is generally considered a bit of an artist's faux pas. There is also an AI element to this, which, to be clear, I'm not as interested in talking about just because there has been very little nailed down as far as the potential use of it. The developers have been known to talk fairly freely and openly about how they could be using AI as part of their creative process, which is potentially suspect, and obviously the developer has their own history of making quite derivative products, which again makes it somewhat justified to have a certain degree of skepticism. And on the other hand, there's just, you know, the gorillas out there who just want to play a fun game where they can put Pikachu in an Amazon warehouse. I think everyone's got some good takes on the subject, and I feel like maybe this is a good time as any to kind of sort through them a little bit. As someone who has been personally passionate about these games for some time, and is also married to someone who has been very frustrated by Pokemon for quite a while.
Like it needs to be I think Sword and Shield was like the last straw for me, and it's not happy. It isn't even like Dexit, that's the problem. Although that is a problem. What's the main phrase? It's like, gotta catch them all, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's like every game was all about like getting every single Pokemon.
Yeah.
And then
I know that.
in the new ones, they release new Pokemon and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's one entry in the series
To be the Pokemon. What was the
Pokemon Master.
Pokemon Master.
But there's one entry in the series, right, where they didn't include all the Pokemon in it. So people were like furious about it. So you couldn't catch them all in the game.
All right.
For me, this all started, as it often does, with a tweet. I do not like that Palworld's success encourages a culture of incredibly derivative, borderline artistic theft, but I do find the idea of what if you could shoot Bulbasaur with an AK-47 being an instant massive hit very funny. Realistically, Nintendo already steals the labor of artists by undervaluing staff and generally acts like huge corporate bullies, so f*** them. But really, this is more of a win for spite than art. And I feel like this tweet maybe came off as a little bit more dismissive than maybe I had intended. I think I may be looking over a lot of more complex conversations when it comes to a subject like this, which is not to say at the same time that people aren't making fairly justified criticisms of Palworld. Directly copied models, company with a history of some fairly shady practices. One of the things that I felt was the most egregious was looking into this and seeing that even fan artists were, in this case, most likely getting their designs ripped for this game. Stuff like that is very egregious to me, and I think that's why I had the kind of knee-jerk reaction that I did have to it. Maybe not just to that, but also to people that were being very dismissive to any criticism of this new game.
Why are you defending the billion-dollar corporation?
Why are you defending the billion-dollar corporation?
Of course you would defend the billion-dollar corporation.
Why are you defending a billion-dollar corporation?
Why are you defending the billion-dollar
corporation?
Why are you defending the billion-dollar
Why are you defending a billion-dollar corporation?
The Pokemon Company recently announced that they will be actively investigating possible copyright infringement by the Palworld developers. If the large corporation wins again, they may need to enlist the help of a financial management app, like today's sponsor, Rocket Money. It's easy to get reckless with spending in a world where seemingly everything is tied to some kind of subscription service, something I have a lot of experience with as someone who tries to keep up with media for my job. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. I didn't need to buy this pegboard. You can organise budgets to help keep track of your spending and get notifications when you've exceeded your limits. You can set up smart savings to manage how much and how often money goes into the right accounts. It's an easy to use, low commitment service, and if you want to join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today, you can go to rocketmoney.com/lackingsaints or click the link in the description to get started for free. Once again, use that link down in the description and become a better money person.
This one has like a lot of like Star Raptor.
See, because like an actual Starling doesn't have like that specific color scheme.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Star Raptor does have those specific feet and that specific like design.
So it's like Mantyke's body, but Mantine's like fins. Pikachu's ears. Would you say that's like a Meganium face?
Yeah, a little bit Whiscash. Also,
has,
the fin has the exact fin of
Sobble.
Yeah. The eyes are definitely a big part of it, where you specifically look at them and you're like, this feels like they grafted on an eye from a Pokemon. Like, even if the actual model looks original, you get this weird uncanny effect because you feel like you've seen those specific eyes before. Okay. Copy
of Meganium, Lilligant, and Goodra. That's the one.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very similar to Cinderace.
Horny. It kind of does have like Salazzle's body. Homage to Salazzle.
I don't want to think about. I don't want to think about this pal anymore. I had to move because there were some people with horses, and I just found a chair in the middle of the woods. So, just gonna make use of this chair. It's obviously worth bearing in mind that Palworld is clearly not just Pokemon, or even its Pokemon designs, even if it's sort of disappointing to see them not be willing to put in the effort or the investment in artists enough to come up with their own more original design work. Something that, to be clear, pretty much every other monster taming game has been more than capable of. That's a particular area of defense of the game that I've always found pretty ridiculous. The equivocation of like any similarities with like, oh, well, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna be able to make a game like this and not have everything look exactly identical? It's very possible. Agumon has a sort of similarity to Charmander. It clearly looks completely different. You've just made your own point. These are things that have like somewhat similarities in terms of what they are, and they're clearly different designs. But again, Palworld is not just these designs. And in fact, Pokemon wasn't even necessarily the primary influence of Palworld. It's also this is obviously, again, a kind of reductive way that people have described the game. And I think by diving into that conversation, we can get a little bit more into the kind of complicated things when it comes to talking about this subject specifically. When we're criticizing a game like Palworld for being derivative, I think it's worth thinking about stuff like Fortnite. After all, if you've been gaming since the ancient times, like I have, you'll of course remember playing PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. When we're talking about Palworld and Pokemon, is also a very interesting relationship to kind of talk about. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds had a huge chunk of its audience essentially consumed by Fortnite, with much the same justifications that people now use to talk about why they're playing Palworld over something like Pokemon. While Fortnite was delivering these little quality of life updates, various things that players had been asking for, PUBG fans were still getting hyped up about, you know, vaulting mechanics being added. If we're going to talk about art, and in particular video games, we obviously always have to keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of iteration taking place. Obviously, everyone has been very fired up about the concept of plagiarism recently, something that I've also covered in fairly recent videos. But I think while there are certainly things to talk about when it comes to Hi, Sherlock. I think it's important for us to think about the limitations of these kinds of plagiaristic accusations and the potential harm that can actually come when we decide to go too far with these kinds of criticisms. Let me tell you all about a little game by name of Arkham Asylum. I've been playing through the Arkham games recently, and I was thinking about that combat system that it uses and the way that following its release, tons of games use that exact kind of free flow. The exact setup of that game was then used for a lot of different game combat systems. And I think a lot of games did benefit from it. It's a very nice, fluid combat system that can be used in a variety of places. Should these other games that use this Batman combat system be sort of punished for that? Be called just rip-offs of that game? I don't know, was Batman a rip-off of Shenmue, or, you know, that Matrix game, or Prince of Persia, games that predate the Arkham games and clearly also have similar systems at play. Now, one of those games was Shadow of Mordor, and if you remember, the only interesting thing about Shadow of Mordor was the Nemesis system. The Nemesis system in which, when certain like small-time enemies defeated you, they could actually sort of rank up, and then eventually you would be sort of creating your own bosses through enemies that you happen to be defeated by. It was a very cool idea. Somehow, Shadow of Mordor actually managed to win multiple Game of the Year awards, pretty much entirely because of this mechanic. In fact, we didn't get to see many, if any, games iterate on this concept because the concept was copyrighted. In the end, we just had this one mid-game that was the only way we could see this system being used. I know now it's being used by other things produced by the same publisher, but I think that kind of sucks. It sucks for creativity within the industry. It's something at least worth bearing in mind if you want to make criticisms of something like Palworld that go beyond just specifically talking about character designs and models and things like that. I try to be very careful when I'm talking about art. If I want to talk about things like IP breaches and copyright, it's very natural within the industry that you're going to have games that develop on each other, iterate on each other. When we are talking about art, there's always going to be this kind of blurred line where we're talking about tributes or inspirations versus rip-offs. This often becomes somewhat subjective, and it's why I want to be careful about coaching the extent to which I want to make these kinds of accusations against Palworld. On the other hand, objectively, those designs are pretty similar.
All you have to do is look at the picture and tell me which of these two creatures are Pokemon.
Right.
Which one's the Pokemon?
That one.
The one on the left.
The left.
The left.
The left.
Okay.
Right.
The right
The one on the right is a Pokemon.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
These guys.
Oh. The one on the right.
Okay.
Now this one.
Now this one.
Oh. The one on... I mean, I would say the right.
You think the right one's the
right.
Pokemon?
The one on the right's the Pokemon.
I think the right one is the Pokemon. It's a bit more detailed, isn't it?
Tell me what you think.
The one on the right, on the left. The one on the...
Purple or no purple?
Purple.
The purple one's the Pokemon?
Yeah.
Okay. You have Galarian Meowth's face pasted on Per Ugly's body, and then it has Delcatty's ears. Another one of these things where people would go like, well, it's obviously a Cheshire cat. That face?
Because yeah,
The
I've seen that
face?
comparison too, and it's like when you look at Cheshire cat depictions, they don't have Galarian Meowth's face. One way I have recently seen people try to dismiss this criticism of Palworld is by claiming that the evidence against the game has been fabricated. The claim being that people have scaled up the models of Palworld for the sake of making it look like they're closer to Pokemon than they actually are. Now, I agree, scaling the models to fit together, just a totally dishonest way to try to criticize the game. On a completely unrelated note, I hope you will enjoy my completely original work, Mini Lisa.
You notice, if you look at these two models very closely, you can tell that mine's very big, and the Farfetch is very small. So there's no way they could be the same.
My mixed feelings on this particular subject led me to an interesting question. If Palworld, rather than making these very similar models to Pokemon, were to literally be a Pokemon fan game, were to actually lift the exact designs of Pokemon, would I care? And I think the answer would probably be no, because I'm not a cock. Let's look at something like A Hat in Time. Great indie 3D platformer, a love letter to many games of the late 90s and early 2000s, a genre of game that I really wish there was more of. If A Hat in Time, rather than just having its own little original character, was just a Mario fan game, if it was literally just a little Mario sprite as the main character, would I care about that? No. I think it's massively creatively limiting that we're in this position where people don't get to use characters or settings that they have some kind of investment with to tell their own stories, to make their own things. I think anyone should be able to tell a Batman story, or have a Mario game, or put Pikachu in something and not be legally punished for doing so. That to me is obscene. But then there's another part of me that thinks, okay, going back to A Hat in Time, what if instead of it being Mario, it was like a palette swap blue Mario? Would I then have a problem with that? And I think then I actually sort of would. And let me explain my thinking on this. Again, I think anyone should be able to take characters or settings that they have an investment in and do whatever they want with them. Characters function as symbols, and especially when we're talking about these big pop culture characters, I think it's very natural that there's going to be this kind of increased meaning that's built between these symbols and their audiences that makes it so there is a kind of deeper meaning to using these properties. Anyone who's like a fan fiction writer probably understands what I'm talking about here. Now, on the other hand, on a creative level, while I might want anyone to be able to make like a Batman story, I also don't want all of the superhero stories to be about Batman, or someone who's clearly just this obvious like derivative take on Batman. I wouldn't want all platformers to just kind of be Mario. I also wouldn't want all monster taming games to basically just be Pokemon. And I think that's what, to me, leads into what I'm actually frustrated about with Palworld. Almost all other monster taming games have not had this issue with creating their own more original work. When we're talking about artistic creativity, when we're talking about derivative work, and when we're talking about copyright, I don't just think that these things are in the same ballpark. I think they're completely different sports. I truly do not care at all about the legal aspect of taking Nintendo properties. What I think I do care about is the idea of creatively being so derivative as to rip directly from the thing that you're taking inspiration from. There's obviously a blurred line here. It's obviously somewhat subjective, and again, Palworld is not just a Pokemon take. As I understand it, the Pokemon side of things was even a fairly late addition in the development process. The game actually took more from stuff like RimWorld, which basically guarantees that at some point I will play it. I've truly put a mentally ill number of hours into RimWorld. This is where I think I have felt frustrated when I've seen people very dismissively say like, oh, you're defending the big corporation when they make any kind of criticism against Palworld. I think we should be critical. I think we should have a desire to see innovation within an industry. I think we should reward originality. And I definitely understand why on some level it's frustrating, especially for people who are creative within the game industry, to see a company essentially be rewarded for doing very derivative things. You can absolutely be critical of corporations and IP law, and also have a desire to see creative novelty. They're just different questions. Arkham game combat can be cool, and it can also be kind of annoying that like most AAA games now kind of feel exactly the same. There's been a lot of criticism of supposedly bitter game devs that are apparently just mad at Palworld because it has succeeded where they have failed. But I think, to be honest, it makes perfect sense that these bitter game devs would be kind of unhappy at trying to contribute something to their medium, trying to contribute something to their industry, and seeing this company that has very much engaged in these very derivative practices being rewarded for exactly that. On the other hand, it's completely expected that that would be rewarded, because what they've basically delivered is a big giant laundry list of all the things that fans of these popular franchises have been asking for a while now. This is part of the rub that I think was highlighted by a fairly controversial thread by the streamer Asmongold. You know, when he argued that from a consumer standpoint, the value of the product to the consumer is the only really important metric.
There have been a number of people who have been furious at the fact that Palworld is successful. And the funny thing about that is that very clearly, and so obviously, none of them matter.
Now in the case of Palworld, clearly that's true. This game is doing absurd numbers. But if anything, I think that only highlights the importance of looking at this from something other than just a consumer standpoint. Something I've ranted about many times on this channel. Capitalism often rewards harmful behaviors, exploitative behaviors, and in the case of art, it rewards derivative content. And I think that is basically the level of nuance I wish we could carry when we're talking about this game specifically. Not to say everyone's defending the big corporation because they have reservations about something that might be going as far as to rip fan designs, to question the creative spirit of a company that has openly talked about how much they love AI art, to have parts of your product be so derivative that people are openly questioning if it is AI art or not. But on the other hand, for us to not actually defend the big corporation, to go so far in our criticisms of the media that we end up basically restating the kind of IP law, copyright arguments that have led to a lot of oppressive behaviors against this industry. Practices that have in the past harmed the innovations that can be made within this medium. And practices that do end up effectively rewarding the biggest and most powerful corporations. At the end of the day, if we're going to be making arguments that Palworld has been exploiting the labor of artists, we should bear in mind that Nintendo has been doing the same thing for decades now. Wait, what's that? What the hell is that? This video arrives almost 3 weeks after the initial release and buzz around Palworld, which by internet commentary standards is basically ancient history. The reason for that is that in the process of me making this video, Nintendo actually came out and said directly that they'd be investigating Palworld's team over this situation. I then thought it'd be worth waiting to see if anything else had developed before I put this out. So far, nothing new has emerged, and if a new thing happens before or soon after I do bring this video out, it will be very funny, and you can all spam nerd emoji at me in the comments. While I was waiting, I thought it would be appropriate for me to play Palworld for a bit myself and give some closing thoughts. That's why you're seeing footage of me playing the game in the background right now, which I really can't apologize enough for. I do think it's important to point out that even though I did spend a fair chunk of this video talking more generally about derivative work in games, including not just designs and aesthetics, but also things like mechanics, people have been fairly specific on what they're criticizing when they talk about Palworld. I don't honestly think most people are upset just because this popular game happens to share a lot of design elements with other popular games. Again, what I really think a lot of the heated arguments come down to is people mixing up two separate conversations of IP lore versus just general artistic sensibilities. I've actually been quite enjoying playing Palworld. Again, horrifically addicted to RimWorld, so not the biggest surprise, but it got me thinking more about the controversy around the game and really cemented my feeling that it's just a shame the developers couldn't have gone that bit further to set their work apart, just because of how much it gives the whole thing this cheap cash-in vibe that I don't think is honestly fair as I play the game. When I look at these designs in isolation, or look at the architecture in-game that barely fits the aesthetic and sure does look a lot like Breath of the Wild, I imagine a fake game made for a mobile ad. I think about that one movie studio that basically just made films so that people's grandmothers would get confused at the supermarket and buy the wrong thing. With a lot of this, it just feels like I'm more being tricked into thinking I'm looking at a different game and not just at some obvious parody, as many have defended the game by suggesting. And it's really frustrating because it's like sometimes they nail it. Relaxaurus is incredible, and if you told me it was a parody of a Pokemon, I'd be thinking, yes. Sweeper, my beloved. Tokotoko, probably better than most Pokemon designs. Then for every one of those, there's about 5 that just feel like a trace. I would say like this is a good example of parody, because this is like clearly not Natu and Xatu, but with the color scheme and like other elements of the design, it looks like it's a take on that. This is like a good example of how to do that, where it's clearly its own original thing.
It looks like its own thing. It's its own little guy.
It feels weird that this exists in the same game that has that other one that is clearly just Meganium plus Goodra plus Lilligan.
The models that are a little suspect are the ones made by less experienced modelers.
There's something that just, I think, feels better when you can look at a design like this and be like, oh, this is reminiscent of a Pokemon, but not be like, oh wait, this is just a Dragonite with a new face grafted on.
The frustrating thing about it is it's like, there's evidence that they're more than competent to do it. It's just some of them I'm like, what are you doing? If all the pals looked like this, there would be like no contest. It would just be like, yeah, it's like clearly doing like the whole like sort of a homage to Pokemon, but they are like distinct enough that they're their own thing. There's a clear indication that they know how to make models not look like Pokemon.
Not even not look like Pokemon. I feel like there's clearly designs here that are reminiscent of Pokemon to the point where it seems like, oh, this is clearly taking inspiration, this is clearly taking influence or paying homage, or working as like a parody. And yeah, I don't feel like I'm looking at this and this is just an uncanny... I think regardless of any accusations people have made about direct art theft, it's totally in the realm of possibility for them to produce a whole range of models that clearly take influence from Pokemon, but are not just uncanny resemblances to Pokemon.
Yeah.
Even here I am trying to limit how far I'm going with these criticisms. Like, I talked about fan designs earlier, and I really think Wixen is pretty suspect. But then I saw a similar controversy about Hangyu, which it turns out was definitely not a stolen design. I think it's important not to rush into these criticisms because you might end up getting something wrong, and generally, even if I do think you could defend most of these as parody, for me this is less about some kind of fair use type dispute and more just about creativity in general. And a lot of this does just feel trashy to me, and it lets down what I think has the potential to be a new and interesting franchise. I do even agree with people saying this could potentially push the Pokemon company to do more to innovate their own games. To me, honestly, the worst outcome of this would be Nintendo using a legal strong arm to clamp down on this and then going back to exactly what they were doing before. What I guess I'll conclude on is that I do hope going forward Palworld is able to do more to distinguish itself, to do what, again, pretty much every other game of this type has been able to do and establish its own identity. I am cautiously optimistic. And for the section of the audience that are more concerned about the exploitation of artists' labor that may have resulted in this product, I definitely encourage a wider look at the standard practices of the video game industry, because you will quickly find this problem definitely reaches far beyond the scope of the Pokemon slavery simulator. Now, go play Cassette Beasts, or Coromon, or Monster Sanctuary. Actually, just go to the Creature Collector Steam page and just run down the list and never stop gaming. But first, consider liking this video and leaving a comment with your thoughts. I actually sometimes do follow-up videos if there are a lot of opinions in my comment section, so yeah. If you think I'm a corporate shill who just wants to attack small bean game developers, please let me know. Otherwise, I've got a Patreon link below if you want to support future videos, or be in the credits scrolling now, or you can just share the video, or you can just let another video of mine autoplay on your TV and enjoy that too. Either way, thank you for watching.
At least it's sat in such a serious face, Jack, like this. Oh, come on! At the end. Oh, come on! Like that. Oh my god.
Prepare for trouble and make it double. Protect our world from devastation.
Oh my god.
Unite all peoples in our nation. To denounce the evils of truth and love. To extend our reach to the stars above. Jesse.
James.
Team Rocket. Bless us with the
Team Rocket. Team Rocket.
Surrender now or prepare to fight.
Team Rocket?
Surrender now or prepare to fight. Duh, that's right. And then it'll be the name of that Pokemon. The name of this Pokemon
What is it?
Meowth.
Oh, I know Meowth. I'll say Meowth now. Oh my god, I know Meowth.
I'm trying to think of any others. Oh, hang on.
Remember to use that Rocket Money link.